thank you for the introduction. I'm a researcher in construction engineering and adult development, and also try to bridge those two. I do that in, for instance, a research project on the indoor environment where we measure everything in an engineering manner and also interview the tenants that live there, how they experience and how they interact with the environment. So there are connections to be made there. But I'm also a teacher, and now I will be more a teacher than a researcher, and I will start by activating you, by giving you an exercise. So, here's the exercise. You have 5 statements from people who try to answer the question of what does personal development means. And your task, should you choose to accept it, is to order these 5 different statements according to increasing complexity or maturity. And you do that individually or in pairs. So you're allowed to discuss with your partner. So, you have 5 minutes. Go. Any statement that seems to correspond to this stage? D. Growing into my role and place in my family and living up to others' expectations of me. Yes, that's a kind of a key phrase there, living up to others' expectations. And also bear in mind, these statements are idealizations, and I constructed these for this purpose. But they also represent a way of viewing the world. So, living up to others' expectations of me, that's typical what happens when you grow into the first conventional stage, which we call the group-centric stage. So you go into into the social relation system, and you can see this the move from the self-centric to the group-centric stage. You can see this as a socialization process. So we may think that this group-centric stage is kind of low in complexity, but it has its purpose because we have to go through it in order to kind of move from the self-centric logic. All right, then we have the next one, which we call the skill-centric. Values, expertise, and being right higher than close relations. This is called the technician. Bill Torbett calls this the technician. It's also referred to as expert stage. So it's very much about expertise, very much about knowledge. But being right is more important than preserving the social order. So when you're participating in discussions on Twitter, you find a lot of these because they are always right. They can find the research backing up their positions, and being right is the most important. And also, this may sound kind of annoying sometimes, but it's a very common stage in our societies. And also, typically, if we ask the questions, okay, we are different stages, why do people grow between these stages? Well, one, I think, as Robert Keegan argues, that moving from home to moving to another town, for instance, moving to take place at the higher education, and have new friends, new social relations. The more social relationships you have, the harder it is to identify with your social relation, because you have a lot of social relationships. And sooner or later you start to differentiate, maybe I am an individual in all of this. So maybe I don't am my relations, rather I may have relations. So this is a differentiation process from the conformistic or group-centric logic. So we find a lot of students acting from this logic, and that's perfectly fine, because students are supposed to be like this. Value, expertise, and being right. All right, so then we move, and did we have any statement? Developing my expertise and my abilities for solving difficult problems. And you can, yeah, so alternative B seems to match this pretty well. Abilities for solving difficult problems. So this is a problem solver, perhaps not always the solver of the best problems, but still. So still, if this person is active as a boss, as a manager, or as an employee in an organization, could be good at driving individual projects, for instance, and being able to do thinking about my expertise and my career, but not really taking the larger context into consideration. So what we see in the next stage, which we call self-determining, and you see the symbols here. This symbol is intended to illustrate how this person, this logic, is like a pillar of society. So not only the group-centric logic is about living up to others' expectations and following the norms, but rather the self-determining logic is more about carrying the norms and internalizing the values. So my values is important, finding out which my values are, and also trying to determine what do I want, which values do I want to have. This is important here. And also, are my values consistent with the values of my surrounding organization or the surrounding society? That's kind of the questions that you try to integrate here. So another way of seeing it is a self-other coordination, that you try to see yourself, your own development, and aligning that with the development of the society or the organization. Develops the individual in alignment with the institution and surrounding culture. So this seems to correspond to the alternative C. Finding aligning my values with the values of my organization and institution. And aligning is a good word, kind of marking that. And the rough correspondence with Robert Kegan's subject-object model, subject-object theory, is that this should roughly correspond with the fourth order of consciousness, or the self-authoring mind. Roughly, I say, because bear in mind, these are different theories, they come from different research traditions, different ways of measuring what adult development is and maturity is. Alright, so we have nailed 3 of them. So let's go back. So skill-setting, self-determining, and group-centric. And I think the two remaining here are the 2 hardest ones. So just take 30 seconds. Maybe if you have made up your mind here, maybe you want to reconsider giving the information you have got so far. So just take, how should we see these? Okay, should we have a raise of hands here? Should we ask which one comes next? Who wants to argue that alternative A comes next? Raise your hand. Alright, and who argues that E comes next? Significantly more. Alright, being able to step out the critical effect of my values. That's interesting. Right now I want to say that there is no right and wrong answer. I have constructed these to kind of match different stages. But we really should be aware that these are statements, and statements and words can be interpreted by different people. For instance, the word identity, what do you mean? That sounds deep. But people have different notions of what identity means. So there's really not a right or wrong answer here. But there's something that I intended, and that's something that for this presentation. So let's see what next looks like. Okay, here we cross another boundary from the conventional to the post-conventional stages. So, and this is what is referred as a self-questioning stage. So, step out of the system and questioning it to the core. So here, if the self-determining, it seems to assume that the system is here, the system should work, and I am myself as a self also can be seen as a system. So this is very much about stepping out of embeddedness, as Robert Kegan would put it. So you see that we see the world from a certain values, from a certain perspective, and being able to step out of that and critically examine that, that's typically what happens at the self-questioning and post-conventional stage. So you step out of conventions as well. So it's not only that you question the conventions, you also question your own self and your own way of making meaning in the world. So I agree with most of you here that the alternative E seems to fit with this description. And finally, the last stage that I will introduce here is what we call the self-actualizing stage. It supports individuals and systems in their transformation. So if the previous self-questioning stage was more about questioning, stepping out of embeddedness, questioning systems and comparing them, this is more about, in a more mature way, in seeing coordinating systems, seeing worldviews as objects that you can manipulate, and that you can see worldviews, and you can see systems, value systems in motion, and you can see how they transform, and you may be able to transform to support that transformation. But also see that you're a part of this system, you just can't observe it from objective stance. You are also transforming in yourself. So the view on the self is that self that is constantly evolving and constantly transforming. So this description also seems to correspond to the fifth order, or self-transforming order of consciousness. So these are the stages that I will introduce. I think Susanne Reuter will elaborate on what happens after this. But I will just conclude here what we have, what we know from stage theories in ego development. So, AD, or adult development, researchers describe developmental stages. So stages means increase in complexity and different stages, qualitative shifts in between. With respect to, first of all, what is it that develops? And here you can see what are the criteria for how we develop. Well, one aspect is complex thinking. So how does complex thinking evolve? Well, we understand the world in a more connected, nuanced and dynamic way, instead of seeing the world as fragmented, as black and white, right and wrong. So you see more and more nuances and see movements in a large degree. And complex thinking is important because you need these tools in order to, if you want to operate at a higher logic, you need to be able to take these perspectives, to kind of organize these perspectives and see them as, see how they are connected. So this complex thinking, another very important dimension is social perspective taking, being able to see the world through the view of others. For instance, at the self-determining stage, you need to see your own development, and you need to take the perspective of your organization, coordinating, how can they work together. Coordinating one, so it's not only about taking different perspectives, but it's also see how these different perspectives are different perspectives of the same thing, perhaps. So coordinating one's own perspectives and interests with others, and dealing with the balance between self and others, being an individual as well as part of a larger collective. Are we individuals or are we part of a larger collective? Well, both and. And the nature of the collective and how we interact with the collective and identify and feel belonging to a larger collective also varies. And self-reflection, stepping out of embeddedness in terms of conventions, own assumptions and subjectivity. So this is how we tend to project out our expectations of the world. So what it means by developing is that you more and more become aware of your own way of projecting things and how you you can express this as the inner space in which you can have operate on worldviews increases as we mature. And finally, further reading. Sorry, this book is only available in Swedish so far. It's called Vuxen och nödvändigt, Adult but not finished or completed. So adult development, stages of complexity and meaning. So this stage theories of ego development according to these these researchers, as well as complex thinking and stages for how you can think more or less complexly. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, there was something in this box for you too.
Oh.
It's a little gift.
Oh.
And also for you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, we have made a slight change in the program, so we'll have a break now, and it will be for 30 minutes, and you will be back sharp 10 to 11, 10:50. And there will be refreshments outside, there will be toilets at every level here, and you can also take a short nap, or not nap, yeah, sip of air if you come back sharp 10:50. Enjoy.